Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks, wherever you happen to find yourself. I'm so glad to see you all here today. My name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, to which all of your graduate institutions belong. I'm so glad to see all of you basking in the glow of Thanksgiving, of course, to join us here for this special session on the Advanced Policy Analyst Program offered by the Canadian government. We're joined by some wonderful representatives from the Canadian apparatus, the Canadian government, to talk to you here today. This session is being recorded and will be available on the APSIA YouTube page later today, and I will be sure to put that link in the chat. You'll also receive it later by email. If, as we go through the presentation, there's something you have a question about or some information you absolutely don't want to leave without gaining for yourself, please take advantage of this opportunity and put those questions in the chat. We'll deal with them at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical issues as you go, again, I'm Carmen Mazzara. I'm at the very top of your participants list. Send me a direct message and we will do our best to get you squared away. And so thank you all again for being here. This is part of an ongoing series we do for our graduate students. So please stay in touch with your career offices to learn about the many other opportunities you'll have to gain information about wonderful chances for you to develop your professional life. And so with that, I'm done talking, and I'm very pleased to turn the floor over to our colleague, Helene, to get started. Helene, please.
Thanks so much, Carmen. And thank you all for being here. As Carmen mentioned, my colleague Angela and I are here today to talk to you about the Advanced Policy Analyst Program, or APAP, which is one of the federal government's signature recruitment programs. Angela and I are both alumna of the program. I currently work at Environment and Climate Change Canada on international climate change negotiations, and I'll just pass it over to Angela to briefly introduce herself.
Thanks very much, Ellen. My name is Angela, and I currently work as a policy advisor at Natural Resources Canada on Indigenous partnerships and pipelines in Western Canada. And Ellen and I both share a background in international affairs, so we have a soft spot for APSIA, and we are both graduates of schools from this alliance, so it's a pleasure to be here with you.
So as Carmen mentioned, today we'll be talking to you about APAP, how the program is structured and how to apply for it, what APAP is looking for in terms of candidates. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat during the presentation, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. But also please feel free to, we'll leave enough time at the end to ask questions, so feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, and we're happy to answer any questions. We'll also be giving a sneak preview of Finance Canada's university recruitment program, which may be of interest to you, and we'll share some more information about some of the other information sessions that they're giving. But first, we'll start with APAP. So APAP is a really unique development program within the federal government. It's a 3-year professional and leadership development program, and it's designed to develop economists and public policy analysts. And what makes APAP such a unique program is that most other federal recruitment programs, like the Finance Canada one we'll talk about a little bit later on, participants stay within one department. Whereas with APAP, participants rotate across 4 departments and specifically spend 6 months in their first year or second year in their sponsoring department, and then do 3 6-month placements across the 3 central agencies of government. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what these central agencies actually are, because frankly, I had no idea what they were before I joined APAP, and I didn't really realize how unique the program was until I actually graduated from APAP. So the 3 central agencies of government are the 3 departments that are at the center of policymaking and decision-making. These departments are the Privy Council Office, Finance Canada, and Treasury Board Secretariat. The Privy Council Office is the department that directly supports the Prime Minister and Cabinet. So when you're working at the Privy Council Office, or PCO, you're really involved on the most political issues, the most pressing and urgent issues. It's sort of the closest you can get to political decision-making while still remaining a nonpartisan, apolitical public servant. Finance Canada, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth during the Finance Canada University recruitment presentation, is the department that is responsible for the federal budget, but it's also responsible for other things like Canada's trade policy, like Canada's participation in international financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. And then the Treasury Board Secretariat is the department that sets the rules for all of government on things like procurement and HR. But from a public policy perspective, it's responsible for regulations and it's responsible for the how of program implementation. So any new program, any new policy has to go through each of these central agencies, PCO, Finance Canada, and the Treasury Board Secretariat before it can actually be implemented. And what's really rare about APAP is, most public servants will actually never work in a central agency. They're all quite small and they all can be quite sort of challenging to get into. And so for most public servants, central agencies are kind of a black box. Some public servants might work in one, in very rare cases two, but it's basically impossible to work in all three central agencies unless you're part of APAP. Another thing to keep in mind is usually public servants who work at a central agency like PCO are quite senior in their career because they're working on just such high level and priority issues for the government. And so again, unless you're part of APAP, it's really rare to be able to join the Privy Council office so early on in your career. What I should also note is that there are 11 departments that are sponsoring APAP this year. So examples of these include Health Canada, Environment Canada, where I currently work, Natural Resources Canada, where Angela works. So there's a wide variety of subject matter departments that are sponsoring this program. And so after participants spend their first 2 years spending 6 months at their sponsoring department and then 6 months at each of the central agencies, they'll spend their third and final year at their sponsoring departments for the full year. And we usually encourage participants to do their 6-month placement at their sponsoring department in a different team than where they do their full year in their sponsoring department. And that's because the intention of APAP is not to provide or to produce subject matter experts at this stage in participants' careers. It's rather designed to provide participants with a really holistic overview and understanding of how decision-making happens within the federal government, what the cabinet process looks like, and it really gives participants the opportunity to work on a variety of issue areas on a wide variety of teams, and that allows participants to really see, what they don't like, what they do like, what is their working style, what's important for them in terms of a team environment and team culture. And after the program is done, participants can choose to continue being generalists, or they can choose to specialize in a subject matter issue depending on where they go next. But really the intent of the program is to develop holistic economists and public policy analysts. There are quite a lot of benefits to joining the federal government through APAP. The first one is that it's just the best way to launch your career. Right from the get-go, you get that experience in the central agencies, which is so rare in government. You gain just such a deep understanding of all the different stages of policymaking and how to influence policymaking. So it's just a great way to really learn about the federal government through this experience. You'll also establish a network pretty quickly and almost, without trying. Because you're switching teams every 6 months, you're joining a new team, you're getting to know new directors, getting to know new senior executives. But also another unique feature of APAP is it's been around for about 3 decades, and APAP alum feel very connected to the program. And so there's just a really strong network of APAP alum, both within the federal government, but also some who've chosen to leave the federal government and are working in different sectors. And so when you join APAP, you immediately have access to this really strong network. It's also a great way to learn new skills. As I mentioned, because you rotate through all these different teams, you'll just find yourselves working on, some issues or some files that maybe you might have never thought about before, but also developing some new skills. So to give you an example, as Angela mentioned, we both studied international relations. I would say I took the minimum amount of economic courses I could get away with. But when I was working at Finance Canada, I was responsible for a $1 billion budget proposal to invest in Canada's forest economy. And so I had to develop new economic and financial and fiscal analysis skills that I really hadn't had the opportunity to before. And this is something that's serving me really well now working on international climate change negotiations, because so much of our work has actually to do with the climate finance element of these negotiations. It's also a great way to serve Canadians. When you're a public servant, you know that what you're working on will help make Canadians' lives better, will help make Canada better. And that's just a really fulfilling feeling to have. And then finally, you just really learn how, when, and where to influence policy. Because you go through all the three central agencies, each of which is involved in the policymaking process, you just learn it from the inside out in a way that few public servants have the opportunity to do. And this is really useful whether you choose to stay in government or whether you choose to leave government and go work in the private sector, in the NGO sector, what have you. Just really knowing from the inside how government works and how to influence policy is such a great skill to have. So in terms of what participants learn, as we already talked about, policy is the number one thing that participants learn. And participants really are encouraged to work on a variety of policy issues, social issues, economic issues, international policy issues, because we're really looking to develop well-rounded generalist economists and policy advisors. As I mentioned, it's also a great way to understand the cabinet process and the role of central agencies. And particularly when you're at PCO, you just have the opportunity to see firsthand how decision-making is made at the political level. When I was at PCO, I had the opportunity to sit in on meetings between ministers and really see how they thought about different issues. Angela can talk a little bit more about her experience at PCO and the opportunities she had to sit on, some calls and meetings between the Prime Minister and his international counterparts. So again, these are opportunities that are pretty rare for federal public servants. So just a really great way to gain a solid understanding of the cabinet system, and similarly to understand the dynamics of policymaking through all the different stages of the policy cycle within the federal government. Another great advantage of APAP is the salary and advancement process. So if you're not part of a development program like APAP or the Finance Canada's university recruitment process, it can be quite difficult to navigate the promotional process within government. It's a very bureaucratic process. It can be a very lengthy process. And basically, APAP takes all that process kind of out and really has a salary and advancement process that is set out for participants. So in their first year, participants enter APAP at the EC3 level. EC is just the classification for economists and policy analysts. So you can see the starting salary there. Following their first year, APAP participants are eligible to be promoted to the EC4 level. And following their second year, APAPs will be promoted to the EC5 level. This is the most significant jump, both in terms of salary, but also in terms of responsibilities. So when you're at the EC3 and EC4 level, you're usually, you might be leading on some of your files, but you'll also be focusing on supporting more senior analysts. Whereas at the EC5 level, you're expected to be able to take the lead on really key files and to really play a leadership role within your team. Another important thing to note is that as soon as participants join APAP, they're full indeterminate employees of the federal government and have access to all the advantages that brings. So they're not on contract, they're not on students, they're fully indeterminate. So they have access to great job security, really generous employee benefits and pensions, up to 18 months parental leave, as well as continuous learning. And APAP actually provides participants with $1,500 per year for professional development, and that can be used on a wide variety of things. So if there are any questions about that, Angela and I can share about the different ways that we use this training budget when we were part of APAP. So participants are required to relocate to Canada's National Capital Region, which includes Ottawa and Gatineau on the Quebec side. This is because all three central agencies are located in Ottawa. We should also mention that the government's return to office policy is a minimum of 2 days in the office. So just really important to know, if you are applying to APAP, you are expected to be moving to either Ottawa or Gatineau, and relocation expenses are covered up to $5,000. And Angela and I both grew up in Toronto, so we know the reputation that Ottawa can have in some cities, but it really is a fun place to be, particularly if you like museums and history, or you really like the outdoors and camping. What's also a great feature of APAP is it's a 12-person cohort each year. So when you do move to either Ottawa or Gatineau, you kind of have a built-in group of friends to discover the city with. And that's a really great feeling, especially because many participants of APAP move from, across Canada, or even if they're doing their master's abroad, which I know a lot of you are, they have a built-in group of friends when they move to Ottawa or Gatineau. So that's a little bit about the program. I'll turn it now to Angela to talk about who we're looking for in terms of APAP participants.
Thanks so much, Ellen. So Ellen has told you a bit more about why APAP, and now I'll explain why you, as an applicant to the program, and how you can position yourself as a competitive candidate for the program. So as Ellen just mentioned, APAP every year selects up to 12 highly motivated candidates for this public policy development program. The skills we're looking for, as opposed to policy expertise or specialized interest in one topic, is a set of transferable skills, including strong analytical faculties, critical thinking, solid written and verbal communication skills, etc., and most importantly, a strong interest in Canadian public policy and an ability to apply those transferable skill sets to any policy challenge. Because APAP is such a rotational program, you will have the opportunity to work on things that you might have never even touched on in your research and studies, but you still need to be able to have those core competencies to apply those skills to any public policy challenge. In terms of the minimum qualifications in your formal education, we require that you are a recent graduate of up to 3 years or an upcoming graduate from a master's or PhD degree. There's no requirement for what academic discipline you would have done your degree in, barring the economic and research methods course requirements that I'll touch on in a second. And in your most recent degree, you also need to demonstrate solid academic standing, which equates to an 80% or A- average. And for those of you who are doing your degrees abroad, you'll have to do a conversion as well as an assessment of educational equivalency to demonstrate that you meet those requirements. As I mentioned, we don't restrict the disciplines that you do your degrees in, but you do need to demonstrate that you have the fundamental economic literacy and research methodology to thrive as a policy analyst. And specifically, that translates to 2 full years in economics, at least 1/2 year in microeconomics, 1/2 year in macroeconomics, and another full year course in some sort of economic topic. And this could be something along the lines of international trade analysis, etc. And so it's up to you to make a case for how your course load has indeed demonstrated an economic understanding. In addition to that, you will also have to demonstrate that you've taken 1/2 year course in a qualitative or quantitative research methods course. So here's a list of the documents that you'll have to provide in your application. It's quite standard, but let me just walk you through briefly. First, you'll need to provide all your post-secondary transcripts, and as I mentioned, demonstrate that your grade point average, regardless of the scale and system, matches the basic 80% or A- scale. You also need to demonstrate that your education is equivalent to a Canadian master's degree through one of the official accreditation services. And we invite you to also show off your other accomplishments in the form of scholarships, awards, leadership and community engagement experience, in addition to 2 references, one in an academic setting and one in a professional/volunteer kind of context. As I mentioned, you will need to make a case for how your course load fulfills the requirements. And here we really encourage you to use simple, straightforward language and mirror the text of the criteria in explaining how you meet the requirements for economics and statistics/research methods courses. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Thank you, Ellen. And I see a question in the group chat about undergraduate courses. Yes, so any courses at the post-secondary level can count towards these requirements. It does not necessarily need to be in your master's. So with respect to the application, it's already open now online, and you can follow the link that will circulate to Carmen after this call, or just Google GC Jobs, which is the central repository for all government job applications. All the information we're presenting to you will also be circulated as a slide deck, but it's also posted on the APAP website for your reference. And the deadline for applications is November 3rd. And we'll also walk you through the consequent stages should you make it through the first screening. So here's a timeline of the application process between now and next July, when participants begin their first rotations if they are selected. So it's currently October, and all your written applications will be screened for the required qualifications. This includes looking at whether you are a PR or citizen of Canada in order to screen you in as eligible, your educational background, other experiences, as well as fulfilling the various criteria for employment. In November, applications who are screened in will then be invited to complete a written assessment, which is essentially a 600 to 800 word essay based on a standard prompt that is the same for everyone. You will have 1 week with the prompt to write it on your own time and then submit it through the online portal. And typically it's a public policy challenge that seeks your recommendations and analysis on the particular issue at hand. And normally it reflects topical public policy problems that are facing Canada today. Now, with respect to the next stage, if you pass the essay with a sufficient score threshold, then you'll be invited to an oral interview in January. And the way I would characterize this interview is less so about understanding you as a candidate, but more so about a public policy oral exam. Let me explain what I mean. We will not be asking you questions like, why are you interested in APAP? Or please introduce yourself to us. I think that will be done in other contexts, but not in this particular setting. The interview will instead focus on 2 types of questions. First, policy questions that mirror the structure of the written assessment in the sense of asking you to provide analysis and recommendations to a particular topical challenge. And the second portion of the interview will be focused on behavioral questions that assess how you would respond to situations in the workplace. So for example, what happens if you have a conflict with a colleague, for instance. So just to give you a sense of the type of scenario questions that you'll be asked to review. The interview interview period will be 90 minutes in total, 30 minutes of preparation where you can sit and write some notes based on all 6 or 5 questions provided to you, and 60 minutes in a self-guided response. So you're able to allocate the time how you wish, and ideally according to the score allocation of each question, which will also be provided to you. In February, applicants who successfully pass the interview will receive offers of employment subject to certain conditions, such as passing the security clearance required to become a government employee. And APAP selects the top 12 in terms of holistic assessments in the application process, but applicants who pass the interview yet are not in the top 12 will still be put in a pool of qualified candidates, and they also get snatched up by hiring managers across public service quite frequently. So there is merit in passing the process in and of itself, and hiring managers understand the rigor of the process of selection for APAP. In February, once offers are accepted and signed, we will begin a matching process. Ellen previously described to you that there are 11 sponsoring departments who each host 1 or 2 APAPers. And in this process, you will receive a batch of information about the departments, express your ranked preference for them, and similarly, the departments will get your CVs and you'll do that matching process again. And this is similar to how you'll be matched as well for central agency rotations in the subsequent stages of your APAP journey. Then in July, the 12 selected participants will begin the program starting with orientation week. And this is a really unique feature of the APAP program. You'll receive a full week of training from the leading experts in government machinery on how public policy is made. Now, this overview of the sausage making process is not available to most public servants who start their job. In fact, often people receive a reading package and not much of an understanding of where they sit within the broader system or how to navigate these policy processes. After receiving this training, you begin your first assignments, and then you're really in the deep end of some really challenging policy files and responsibilities where you'll be treated like a full-fledged analyst as opposed to a co-op student or an intern. So I noticed as I'm speaking, there are a couple of questions about the application process, and maybe I'll just take a moment to address them now, if that works for you, Ellen.
Go for it.
Perfect. So first, I see a question about the online application says that all grades have to be published by June 1st, 2024. For schools that are in the quarter system, the final quarter grades are published in mid-June. So the reason why there is a cutoff date for June 2024 is because we expect people to be in their jobs on a full-time basis in July 2024. Therefore, for grades, I would suggest that you submit whatever is available at the time of application and update your transcripts later, as long as you're available to work on a full-time basis starting from July. This also means that if you have, let's say, a dissertation that's due later in the summer, but all your coursework is finished in mid-June, that would not be a problem and you can still apply for the present cycle. With respect to Sarah's question, if your final semester ends in August, meaning that your courses run until then, we would recommend that you apply for the program in the subsequent years, given that you are still eligible for APAP in the 3 years after you finish your degree. And I neglected to mention earlier that the degree also includes PhDs and JD programs as well, so not only Masters of Arts. With respect to Sue's question,
Sorry, Angela,
yes.
maybe just to jump in on that question, you are still eligible if your coursework is done in June 2024, but let's say you have a thesis or a dissertation that is due later, you can still participate in the program. You just have to be done your coursework by June 2024 so that you can work full-time by the beginning of July 2024. Sorry.
Perfect.
Angela.
No, not at all. Thank you so much for chiming in. I'm just going to make my way through the list of questions, if that's all right. Sue asked how large the pool of applicants has been in the past, and it varies by year. I would say at the lowest, about 400, 500, and at the highest, about 900 plus. And it also varies in the sense that, for example, in the year that Elena and I applied, at that time, permanent residents were not received at the same order of priority as citizens. Now that's no longer the case. Citizens and PRs are treated equally. And so the number of applicants who are screened in as a result of that criteria changing is also increased. Participants currently based outside of Canada are eligible for the program as long as you currently hold PR or citizenship status with the country. Last question that I see is proficiency in French required? It is not required. However, in the public service, I would say career mobility hinges on bilingualism. And so while you don't have to be proficient in French at the time of entering APAP, you will have to, or I would highly encourage you to develop some French literacy while you're in the program. And that's a common place where APAPers spend their $1,500 per year in professional development training. But the short answer is no, you're not required to be bilingual in English and French at the time of application.
We should
Angela,
also
I
mention
have
that, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Eileen, this is Carmen from APSIA. Someone kindly sent me a direct question that I wanted to pose. For the statistics part of the application criteria or the eligibility criteria, do research methodology courses count?
Yes. Sorry, Ellen, did you want to go for it?
No, go for it.
Yes, research methodology courses do count. It does not have to be a stats course per se. Like my kind of qualifying course was a qualitative methods course.
Just to add on to the previous question about French, as Angela mentioned, so you can use your APAP training budget to learn French. But as we'll cover in the finance university recruitment info session, departments will also provide either French courses, or some departments will pay for you to take French lessons. So there are a lot of supports in place to help Anglophones develop, French skills, or Francophones develop English skills. So there are a lot of supports in place within the federal government to help promote employees' bilingualism.
Perfect. Thank you. I see 2 more questions. Ellen, do you mind if we go through them first and then we can dive into the second segment?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, great. Alex asks, are there opportunities to branch into other Government of Canada departments post APAP? Absolutely. And this is one of the great benefits of being a public servant in the Government of Canada is internal mobility at your level across a very wide range of departments and agencies is highly common and encouraged. So after you finish your 3 years in APAP, you are welcome to go anywhere you'd like in government. And a lot of those opportunities are available to you through networking, which you'll organically already have a community of champions based on your APAP rotations. So definitely after your 3 years in APAP, you were able to go wherever you would like within the federal service. Another question here is, how is the sponsoring department selecting specific candidates? Are your preferences asked? As I briefly described, you will receive an information package about the departments, and your ranked preferences will be taken into account, as well as the department's ranked preferences of the candidates. Okay, great. I think I've cleared the question box. Ellen, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered it all. But
Perfect.
feel free
Okay.
feel free to keep your questions coming in case anything pops into your mind as we continue the presentation. And we'll also leave time at the end for any questions.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on now to the next slide. So in conclusion, just to wrap up this segment of the presentation, Elena and I can both vouch for the experience in APAP as being really an unparalleled way to enter and excel in the public service. It is the fastest way, both from a career mobility perspective and a learning trajectory perspective, to understand how policy is made in Canada and establish a very strong network of mentors, colleagues, and managers across the federal service. It's highly prestigious, and APAP is viewed of high regard for a lot of hiring managers. And even if you choose to pursue opportunities outside government after the fact, you will have an excellent understanding of how government works, which will stand to benefit you in the longer term as well. So with that, we'll wrap up this segment of the presentation and transition to give you a preview of what I like to call our cousin program, which is the Economist and Policy Analyst University Recruitment at the Department of Finance. The Department of Finance, as Alen had described to you earlier, is one of the central agencies, and they offer their own university recruitment program, which focuses on rotations within the department. So as opposed to getting a perspective of various departments across the government, you'll focus on different teams in finance. And one key differentiation I'll flag right up front for you between APAP and UR before handing off to Alen is the UR program at the Department of Finance, University Recruitment, has a longer runway in the sense that you will progress from an EC3 level to an EC6 level, as opposed to an EC3 to an EC5 level in the context of APAP. However, it takes a 5-year process between 3 to 6, as opposed to a 2-year process between 3 to 5. And your rotations are also less structured in that you're not moving every 6 months, but your promotions as well as your internal changes within the department are very much directed by you, as well as your negotiations with managers. So with that, Ellen will tell you a bit more about the Department of Finance.
Sure. Thanks, Angela. So the Department of Finance was probably one of my favorite placements just because of the policy issues that they work on. So as I mentioned, finance is responsible for the federal budget and is really the center of economic and fiscal policy within the federal government. But they also do a lot of things other than that. So for example, finance works quite a lot on international trade. They work quite a lot on international financial and economic issues. They also do a lot of economic and fiscal forecasting, work on taxation and how to use taxation to achieve the government's aims around income redistribution or health and population aging. Finance Canada is also responsible for the monitoring of the banking and financial systems and making policy for that sector. So, for example, recently the finance department set up a team to really focus heavily on cryptocurrency and how to govern that. So there's a lot of great teams that you can work on at Finance Canada. And as I mentioned before, my background very much was not in economics. I did not consider myself an economist at all. If you are an economist, if you like working on, economic and fiscal forecasting, if you like really working with that economic and fiscal data, finance is a great place for you. But finance is also a great place for you if you really like working on social policy, for example. Finance does a lot of work on health agreements with the provinces and the territories. Finance is also a great place to work if you're interested in international relations or international issues. That's where Angela did her placement at finance, and so she can talk a little bit more about that. It's also a great place to work if you're interested in climate change and the environment. I worked specifically on the economic and fiscal aspect of climate change, which was something I really enjoyed. So just want to really share that finance is not just for people who are really interested, really focused on economics and financial issues, there's a lot of really great places and great teams that you can work on that address, a whole bunch of economic, fiscal, social, environmental, and international issues. What differentiates finance from other departments within the federal government is that it's quite small. There's only about 800 employees. It's also quite young. I would say most people in finance are like in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and it's a really dynamic organization. I previously worked in the private sector before joining government, and finance really reminded me of the private sector. It's really lean. It has really high-performing analysts, and there's just really great opportunities to work on some of the most important and key public policy issues. As Angela mentioned, the Finance Canada's UR is the only development program that reaches a target level of EC6. So the other recruitment programs like APAP and others typically only reach the EC5 level. Finance also really believes in investing in the learning and growth of their employees. So I mentioned previously that there are some opportunities for second language training within the federal government to help achieve that bilingualism. And finance is definitely one of the departments that provides the most resources in terms of second language training. It also has a highly engaged young professionals network. I really enjoyed being part of it when I was at finance. They do a lot of cool events like having coffee with the deputy minister, which is the highest, the public service head of Finance Canada. They also have sports teams and other social opportunities. And those are things that I didn't really find in any of the other departments I was in. So definitely that's a big highlight at finance. Working at finance also provides you with a range of international assignment possibilities. Finance Canada has a number of positions globally, for example, at the IMF or the World Bank in DC, in New York, at the Canadian consulate there, in India, in the UK, in France, in China. There's a lot of possibilities to work abroad for the government through Finance Canada. And that wasn't something that I really understood prior to joining government. For those of you who are interested in working abroad for the government, I really thought that Global Affairs Canada and being a foreign service officer was the only way to work for a Canadian diplomatic mission. But actually, finance is one of the great ways to do that as well. So I'll pass it now over to Angela to talk about the eligibility requirements for the Finance Canada University Recruitment Program.
Thanks, Ellen. So a lot of their eligibility criteria and application modalities are quite similar for these post-secondary recruitment programs across government, and APAP and Finance's UR program is no different. The core set of skill sets that I just described in terms of a keen interest in policy, strong analytical and communication skills, driven by impact, et cetera, are still characteristics that Finance UR is looking for. On average, finance recruits about 25 UR analysts every year, but again, they do have a pool of applicants that pass through the selection process and are quickly snatched up by other hiring managers across the government. In contrast to APAP, finance does have a set list of disciplines that they're looking for master's degrees in, including economics, public policy and administration, international relations, which applies to the majority of you perhaps, and business administration and finance. They also have separate streams for people with legal degrees, and the eligible degrees should be completed by December 31st, 2024, because as I mentioned before, the start date for Finance UR is not all in July, for instance. There's more of a staggered start and more flexibility around timelines. Finance's program has a bit more of a specialization requirement in economics. You must demonstrate the equivalent of at least 3 full-year undergraduate or graduate courses in econ. And those of you with a concentration in finance at the master's degree level can also be considered if you have 3 or more half-year post-secondary courses in economics. The application for Finance UR is also currently open, and their deadline is just slightly before the APAP deadline of November 3rd. Their applications close on October 30th. This presentation that Ellen and I are delivering is meant to be a preview to the program, and on the website you'll see public Zoom sessions throughout October that will provide more information in depth about the finance program, and we encourage you to reach out to this email address in the bottom right corner here if you have further inquiries about the eligibility requirements and application process for the Finance UR program. So with that, we'll turn over back to the Q&A box and see if we can address any questions. And here, Ellen is also projecting the email address of the APAP Secretariat, so the first program we started with our presentation with, and you're also welcome to reach out if you have any questions. I see here a question about whether past APAP participants have gotten to work in other countries rather than staying in Canada. This is a great question and a timely one because I am one of them. And so I'm actually about to pursue an opportunity abroad and outside government. So it certainly has been done. I will say, though, most APAP graduates do choose to stay in government for a very long time because of how well this program sets you up for a public service career. But also, as a result, our 3 decades of alumni are senior management across the system. And so you have a really robust community of people championing your experience and trying to make sure you're well supported in your journey.
Angela, I have a question related to that. A number of our colleagues here, and I know you did this as well, are earning their graduate degrees outside of Canada. Do you have advice on the security clearance process and things they may want to start to keep track of or think about as they would prepare to apply for the program?
Absolutely. And Dylan and I both did our master degrees in Europe. And so this is a question that we have personal experience with. So in my case, I will be honest and say, as someone who was born and raised in China and naturalized into Canadian citizenship quite recently, the security clearance process was an adventure, to say the least. So it's definitely something you want to be thinking about in the sense that preparing documentation about previous addresses, your, for example, friends and family who don't live in Canada, your time as a resident or as a traveler outside Canada, creating a list of dates that would be helpful as well. And just making sure that you are able to prove to our intelligence security institutions that you are a trustworthy person that we should be investing government information access in. I would also say that as people who did our degrees abroad, Elena and I both had to think ahead with respect to the equivalency assessment of our degrees. And this can be done with one of the accredited institutions, but it does take some time and there is a fee associated with it. So I definitely would suggest that if you're doing your degree outside Canada, it's an opportunity for you to look into how you can get that diploma then accredited to a Canadian equivalent, essentially. Ellen, is there anything else you would like to add to this?
Yeah, I think you covered it all. Would really urge you, if you are looking to work with the federal government, to start looking into the equivalency process. Mine, I was able to fast track in 3 weeks because I kind of left it at the last minute and I had to pay a lot of extra money to fast track my equivalency. So learn from my experience and make sure you give yourself enough time. As Angela mentioned, our security services will be really interested in what you did while you were abroad. So, for example, I did my master's in the UK and I actually had to get a police report from the UK, kind of testifying that I didn't do anything illegal or anything like that. This will all be explained to you as you go through the security clearance process. But I agree with Angela. It's definitely great to start making a list of where you've lived and what your travels have been. I think they asked for in the past 10 years, which was pretty difficult for me to remember, to be perfectly honest. So definitely echo Angela's advice.
Great. We also have another question that was sent directly to me about the letters of recommendation. And one of our colleagues is curious if it's valuable to have at least one of those references be from Canada.
Good question. First, let me clarify. Don't think that the references refer to recommendation letters. And I would love to be corrected, Elena, if you think differently, but I understand it's just the contact information of your 2 references, one academic and one professional.
Yeah.
I don't think we give any preference or any additional scoring or weighting to a Canadian reference as opposed to an international one. I know I myself certainly submitted references of people who don't live or work in Canada.
I think too, so we've been doing these recruitment sessions with different universities, and some of the questions that come up are, if you have hundreds of people applying, what are things that I can do on my CV or on my application to really help me stand out? And the thing that we have learned about government recruitment is, in order to be really transparent, in order to be equitable and fair, the selection process is really based, once you're screened in for your eligibility, the selection process is really based on your written assignment and your interviews. So we would really urge you to focus your attention on preparing for your written assignment and the interviews. And the best way to do that is by staying up to date with, the key policy discussions and issues that are happening in Canada. The best way to do that is just to watch or read the news, the Canadian news. Another great thing is to really focus on your communication. You'll find that in Government of Canada, interview processes or written assignments, there's usually, question one and then part A, B, C, D, E. And you'd be surprised at how many essays we've marked that are really excellent, but only answer the first two questions and don't go into every facet of the question. And unfortunately, we can't give that answer a high mark. So we really urge you to read all of the questions very carefully and to answer them very clearly, because basically we have an evaluation rubric. And as we're reading your essay or as we're listening to your interview, we're marking it based on this rubric. So you just want to communicate your points as clearly as possible so that it's really easy for the person interviewing you or for the person marking your essay to say, oh, yes, they've answered this, they've answered this, they've answered this, like just really, really clear communication is so key to a federal government recruitment process. And as Angela mentioned, you won't get any questions about who are you and why are you a great fit. I remember I had prepared all those questions and I was really surprised in the interview process, but it really is content based. To be fair, to be transparent. And the government doesn't expect you to be an expert in, cyber policy and foreign policy and, all these different things. It's really more to have a general understanding of the key policy issues and to demonstrate your analytical skills. Angela, I don't know if you have anything else to add for advice.
No, I think you covered it all. It's exactly that. It's straightforward communication, clear, concise writing. Originality and flowery language is not necessarily rewarded, like Ellen was saying. But I also see some questions popping up here just in the margins. Maybe we can continue to take them if that's all right. In terms of the format of the interview, I believe the interview is virtual, including now that we are post-pandemic, or mostly. And to clarify on Alex's question, unfortunately, you have to be in Ottawa to complete the program. I think during the pandemic, there were some flexibilities about working virtually from a different part of Canada, but certainly for the technology and the security process, you cannot be overseas. And in the remote case that you're able to kind of take a few days or take a few weeks outside Ottawa, that is also on a case-by-case basis and shouldn't be assumed. It's more so the discretion of your manager, I would say. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Because if not, I was thinking, Elan, maybe we can also share informally a bit more about our experiences, because I know you flagged that we should tell our audience today our specific placements and what we did in government. So maybe we can use the last 10 minutes of that, of our time in that way. Okay, perfect. Would you like to start?
Sure. So I joined APAP after having worked for a couple years in the private sector. I did my first placement at the Treasury Board Secretariat, and this was during the 2021 federal election. So my team was responsible for preparing for whatever eventuality of that election would result in. So getting ready to brief whoever would be our new minister, putting together, working with all the teams across the department to put together, the list of 100 decisions that the new minister would have to make within their first 6 months. So that was a really great way to gain an understanding of how the department, how the Treasury Board Secretariat worked. At Privy Council office, I worked on intergovernmental affairs. So that's the relations between the federal government, the provinces, and the territories. They're quite tense relations right now, just because there's a lot of political differences between the federal government and a lot of the provincial and territorial governments. So that was really interesting to navigate. And as I mentioned, I really was able to get high-level exposure to my Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, but also all the other ministers within the federal cabinet that work on intergovernmental issues, and that's most of them because of the way that the Canadian Federation is structured. So that was a really cool opportunity. At finance, as I mentioned, I worked on the economic and financial aspect of climate change. So looking at, costing all the different proposals, all our different environmental policies, working on the environment aspect of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Really, really enjoyed my time at finance. And then I did my 6-month placement at Environment Canada working on trade negotiations. So my team was responsible for negotiating the environment chapter of free trade agreements with India, with the UK, with Ecuador, among others. And now, as I mentioned, I'm still at Environment Canada and currently working on international climate change negotiations. So really getting ready for COP28, which will be happening in Dubai in about a month or so. And again, would echo my previous point that when I first joined APAP, I was a bit disappointed that Global Affairs Canada wasn't a sponsoring department. But throughout my placements, particularly at finance and now at environment, I've really been able to work on international issues. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that there's a lot of departments in the federal government who work on international relations and global and geopolitical issues. And Angela can get a little bit more into her experience at PCO and finance on these issues. So I know a lot of you are doing your master's in international relations, international issues. So really recommend APAP as a great program to be exposed to that within the federal government. Angela, over to you.
Absolutely. Yes, always a tough act to follow, Len, but picking up on where you just left off, I think I would share that sentiment that international work is everywhere across the government, but also that when you come into APAP, you get an understanding of the domestic machinery, the domestic policy questions, and what drives our decision makers, because often foreign policy, unfortunately, isn't the sole engine of any of Canada's relations with other countries and in other contexts. So, like Alen, I started in July 2021 during the heart of the writ period of our election. And at that time, I was working in a strategic policy shop at Natural Resources Canada, which is my sponsoring department. I was specifically working on mining policy and looking at emerging frontiers of mining, including seabed mining, circular economy, space mining, and other innovative forms of Canada's resource economy. And in a strategic policy shop, you do a lot of medium-term planning, election watching, and kind of a typical classic policy function for a government department. So that was a great foundation to then spring into my central agency placements. In January 2022, I started at the Treasury Board Secretariat working on regulatory reviews. And this was my first exposure to regulations, and they weren't dry and legalistic as I had imagined, but regulatory policy is actually super interesting, especially when you're looking at a horizontal examination of how government departments work together to enact and implement regulations in a specific field. So I worked on issues like supply chains, clean technology, aquaculture, and a number of other regulatory areas. Then I moved to the Privy Council Office, or PCO, in July 2022. And this was the dream placement in the sense that it was closest to what I studied in international affairs. I worked in the team that supports the Foreign and Defense Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister. And my role was to support a number of key foreign policy initiatives, including the Indo-Pacific strategy, our crisis response in Ukraine and in Haiti, et cetera. So that opportunity gave me great exposure to high-level political dialogue. Often I was writing meeting notes that would then make their way into the hands of the Prime Minister within hours. And I was able to listen in on some of the calls between Prime Minister Trudeau and President Zelensky of Ukraine, or with CARICOM leaders in response to the Haiti crisis. So that opportunity was fantastic. And again, unparalleled at the junior level that we are at by virtue of APAP and not necessarily me. So I think just to give you a sense of the privileged access that APAP would give you in government. Then this January, I moved to the Department of Finance, where Alen mentioned there is a lot of concrete international work going on. And I had the opportunity to lead Canada's engagement with the EBRD, or the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, in London, where Finance Canada also has a couple postings. And my role was to devise advice on Canada's voting position with respect to policies, projects, strategies at this development bank, and be engaged in some of the discussions about how to reform our international financial institutions. And then now I'm back in my home department, NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, and working on Indigenous reconciliation in the context of resource projects. A very important but difficult file, as you can imagine. So I think my run of APAP really showed me how diverse the public servant experience can be. And it's really served me well as I move on to the next stage of my career in an international organization. So I would again highly advise that you apply to APAP as well as a range of other government recruitment programs, because it really is so rewarding being a public servant.
Well, many thanks to you both so much for sharing your experiences and all of the great details on the APAP program. One last super brief question with the time that we have, and that's, how do you feel that your graduate studies prepared you for the work that you're doing now?
Good question. Maybe I can start, and Elaine, you're welcome to chime in and add. I think for me, I did my Master's of International Affairs at the Graduate Institute of Geneva, which will always have a special place in my heart. I think my education was very professionally oriented, and that it prepared me well for the briefing skills, the writing skills, the collaborative skills that I needed in the workplace. And I think that's a very strong feature of a lot of APSIA schools when they prepare you for careers in international affairs. I also think my degree was highly collaborative and allowed me to develop the soft skills that often a traditional kind of formal education might not equip you with. And that ability to navigate institutions, bureaucracy, partnerships really also helped me well, because in the public service, we don't work in silos. And it's really important that as an analyst, you know who to call when a problem arises, because even though the system might be siloed, as an analyst, you are highly integrated into a number of connections, a number of networks, communities, and policy spheres, which has been proven really valuable in my career. Ellen, over to you.
Yeah, I completely echo everything that Angela said. What I would add too is what really helped me was sort of the multidisciplinary aspect of my international relations degree, learning about history, political science, economics. And as Angela was mentioned, our foreign policy issues are very much influenced and at times directed by what's happening domestically, both politically, but also economically, socially, et cetera. And so it really taught me to look at issues from like a systems perspective rather through a very narrow focus. And I think that's really important when you're working on public policy. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything reflects different things happening in society, in the economy. And then the last thing I would say is just the writing skills. Like, I didn't realize how lucky we are in social science degrees to be really trained to think critically, but also write clearly. That is such a huge part of our job in government, because almost every decision is made after we provide our recommendation, our advice, which is usually done through like a written memo or a written briefing note. So I just think in general, we have really good degrees if we do our degrees in the social sciences.
Thus ends this commercial for, no, I'm kidding. Well, thank you so much to our speakers. What a wonderful presentation. Angela, Elaine, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our attendees. We look forward to seeing you at future APSIA webinars. So please do keep in touch with your career office. And I really encourage all of you to explore more of the resources that were shared here today to see how you can participate in this wonderful program and launch your career in public service. Thanks to everyone, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Take care.